Hey there, my name is Joanna. I'm a 32-year-old marketing professional living in a cozy little suburban neighborhood that's supposed to be a peaceful haven, you know? The kind of place where you wave to your neighbors and have block parties in the summer. But let me tell you, peace is a fragile facade, easily shattered by a single obnoxious act. It all began on a crisp October evening, just as the leaves were turning shades of fiery red and orange. I had just returned from a long day at work, exhausted and looking forward to curling up on my couch with a cup of chamomile tea and a good book. But as I pulled into my driveway, my heart sank. There it was, Kyle. My neighbor, a self-proclaimed car enthusiast, had parked his monstrous lifted truck right next to my petite sedan. His truck was a behemoth, towering over my car like a hulking giant. And to top it all off, he left just enough space for me to barely squeeze in without risking a scratch on my already battered paint job. Kyle was everything I despised about my neighborhood, a loud, egotistical man whose idea of fun seemed to involve revving his engine at all hours and blasting music that rattled the windows of my home. He boasted about his truck like it was a trophy, often mocking my car's modest size whenever the chance arose. We didn't have a history per se, but I had learned to keep my distance from him. His arrogance was an impenetrable wall, and I had no desire to scale it. As I fumbled to get out of my car, I could already feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't the first time Kyle had pulled this move. In fact, it felt almost like he was testing the waters, pushing my patience to see how far he could go. My heart raced as I imagined confronting him, the words building up in my throat, but part of me hesitated. Would it even matter? Would a drunken rant simply fuel his ego further? As I glanced at my cramped driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that my kindness and patience had been mistaken for weakness. And that's when the idea hit me, a spark igniting in the back of my mind. What if, instead of letting him get under my skin, I turned the tables? The thought was audacious, and I could almost hear the thrill of vengeance whispering in my ear. But as I stood there, staring at the monstrous truck that occupied my space, a sense of determination washed over me. I wasn't going to let Kyle's arrogance go unchecked anymore. No more playing the role of the nice neighbor while he tramples all over my boundaries. The lines had been drawn, and like a dormant volcano ready to erupt, I could feel the simmering rage building within me. Little did I know, this would set off a chain reaction that would not only shake the foundation of our neighborhood dynamics but also teach Kyle a lesson about respect. As I took a deep breath, I realized this was just the beginning. I hadn't even stepped inside my house when the storm of emotions surged within me. I tossed my bag onto the kitchen counter and paced back and forth through the narrow hallway. A knot tightened in my stomach as I replayed the scene, Kyle, standing by his truck, casually tossing me a dismissive glance as if my irritation was nothing more than a fleeting annoyance to him. It wasn't just about the parking, it was the principle of it all. You see, I had always prided myself on being the calm, collected neighbor. The one who offered freshly baked cookies during the holidays and organized the annual community cleanup. I wanted to be that neighbor, someone who brought people together. But Kyle's blatant disregard for basic decency made me question everything. How could someone be so inconsiderate? He made a mockery of my efforts to foster a friendly environment, and his arrogance felt like a personal slap in the face. He had crossed the line, and each time I saw that truck parked too close to mine, it felt like a reminder of his power over me. It was infuriating. I was usually the type to give people the benefit of the doubt, but Kyle made that impossible. Every time I had to squeeze into my own car, every time I heard his engine roar to life at an ungodly hour, I could feel my skin crawling. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a daily reminder that he didn't respect me, or anyone else, for that matter. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I found myself tossing and turning, unable to shut my mind off. Why should I let him win? I thought. He didn't know me. He didn't know the hours I worked just to afford a safe place to live, the sacrifices I made to keep my life afloat. He was a reminder that some people took pleasure in wielding their privilege like a weapon, and it struck a chord deep within me. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the curtains, and I woke up with a newfound resolve. I would no longer let his rude behavior dictate how I felt or how I lived. It was time to show Kyle that he wasn't the only one who could play games. I had a few tricks up my sleeve, after all. I started small. Instead of parking in my usual space, I pulled my car to the very edge of my driveway, leaving just enough room for him to squeeze in on the other side. Each time he entered and exited his truck, I watched through my window, feigning innocence while secretly reveling in the irritation I could see on his face. It was satisfying, almost therapeutic, to see that he wasn't as invincible as he thought. But then things escalated. My friends, noticing my discontent, encouraged me to take bolder steps. Why not put a note on his windshield? One suggested, her eyes gleaming with mischief. As I considered it, I found myself grinning, even laughing at the thought. I realized that under my layers of frustration, there was a part of me that hadn't felt this alive in years. The next day, I printed out a small, sarcastic note, "Hey Kyle, I love your truck. It makes my car look even smaller." I slipped it under his windshield wiper before I rushed to my car, heart pounding with adrenaline. As I drove off, I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of him walking toward his truck, confusion written all over his face. I chuckled, the tight knot of anger slowly loosening as I imagined his reaction. But Kyle's retaliation was swift. He responded with a sharply written note of his own and shoved it into my mailbox, full of bravado and threats that he'd take care of the little car issue if I didn't back off. I felt my heart race, a mix of anger and fear igniting within me. This wasn't just a game, it was turning into a war. But part of me felt invigorated. I was no longer just the nice neighbor. I was fighting back. As I stood in my kitchen, staring at the note, I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. This was not just about a parking space anymore, it had become very personal. I was reclaiming my space, not just in the driveway but in this neighborhood, in my life. I could feel the scales tipping, and the thrill of vengeance coursed through me. I was determined to win this battle, whatever it took. And that's when I knew, this was just the beginning. The days that followed turned into a relentless cycle of cat and mouse, and what I thought would simply be a harmless game escalated into a full-on war. Kyle, oblivious to the fact that he was fighting against an underestimated woman, began acting out with even more audacity. It was as if my little jab had awakened a sleeping giant, and now he was determined to assert his dominance in the most obnoxious ways possible. Each morning, I woke up with a sense of dread mixed with anticipation. Would he park even closer to my car today? Would he retaliate with another nasty note? The tension in the air was palpable. And it wasn't just about the parking anymore, it was the idea of reclaiming my territory. I felt like a queen defending my castle, emboldened by the thrill of battle. One evening, as I returned home from work, I couldn't help but notice that Kyle had moved his truck even closer than before, so close, in fact, that I was forced to park on the street rather than deal with the frustration of squeezing into my own driveway. The glare of my headlights caught the glint of his truck's chrome rims as if they were mocking me. That was it, I had reached my breaking point. In an impulsive rush of anger, I decided to take my tactics up a notch. I posted a series of exaggerated warnings on our neighborhood's Facebook page, cleverly crafted but dripping with sarcasm. Attention! There's a monster lurking in our neighborhood, beware the lifted truck that terrorizes small cars. I even included a picture of Kyle's truck, distorted with a funny filter that made it look like a cartoonish bull. The likes and responses flooded in, my friends rallied around my cause, encouraging me and sharing their own stories of inconsiderate neighbors. But as the attention on my post grew, so did Kyle's fury. That night, I heard his truck rumbling to life at 2 a.m., the sound reverberating through my walls, shaking my very foundation. My heart raced as I peered through the curtains, seeing Kyle sitting in the driver's seat, the headlights illuminating him like a spotlight in a twisted drama. He was clearly trying to send a message, he wouldn't back down easily. The following day, I woke to an unexpected surprise. My car was covered in a layer of sticky, dripped-down substance, maple syrup. I couldn't believe my eyes. A wave of fury washed over me as I realized that Kyle had resorted to childish antics. The viscous liquid clung to the paint, and as I wiped it away with a rag, I felt my resolve hardening. This was war, and I couldn't just sit back and allow my emotions to dictate my actions anymore. I needed to hit him where it hurt, the one place a car enthusiast holds dear, his precious truck. I spent the next few days concocting a plan, all while maintaining my cool facade. As he pranced around the neighborhood, boasting about his truck to unsuspecting neighbors, I bided my time, my heart racing with anticipation. Finally, the day arrived. I knew Kyle had a car show coming up that weekend, a big event where he'd be showing off his beloved truck to a crowd of admirers. And that's when I seized my opportunity. Armed with a can of spray paint, I transformed my plan of attack into something that would leave a lasting impression. With careful precision, I scrawled my truck's bigger than your ego across the back of his vehicle, not something that would damage the paint, but something that would definitely draw attention. As I stood there, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. What if I got caught? What if this escalated beyond my control? But part of me reveled in the thrill of being a rebel, standing up against the bully in our neighborhood. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of commotion outside. Curious, I peered out the window and found a small crowd gathered around Kyle's truck, their delighted laughter cutting through the air like music. I felt a pang of satisfaction as I observed Kyle's face twist in disbelief and rage, the words I had painted glaring back at him under the bright sunlight. But then he saw me. Our eyes locked for a split second, and I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. A mix of shock and fury washed over his face, and I could feel the heat of his glare as he stormed toward my house, fists clenched and jaw set. The excitement of the crowd dimmed as they sensed the tension brewing between us, our little feud now a spectacle for all to witness. "Joanna," he shouted, his voice slicing through the chatter of the crowd like a knife. "You think this is funny? You think you can just disrespect my property like that?" I stepped out of my house, heart racing, but I stood my ground. "You crossed a line, Kyle. You've been a total jerk, and I'm not going to let you walk all over me." I could feel the adrenaline pulsing through my veins as I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos. His face flushed crimson, and for a moment, I thought he might back down. But instead, his rage only deepened. "You don't know who you're messing with. This isn't over, Joanna." As the crowd began to disperse, I felt a rush of victory mixed with a sense of dread. I had provoked the beast, and now there was no turning back. This was no longer a simple dispute over parking. It had transformed into a bitter rivalry that threatened to consume both our lives. The stakes were higher than ever, and as I lay down that night, the weight of what I had done settled heavily on my chest. I was in deep, and I had no idea how far Kyle would go in retaliation. But one thing was clear, this was far from over. I could feel it, the fight was intensifying, and I was ready to meet him blow for blow. There was no backing down now, I was in it to win, no matter the cost. The following week felt like a fever dream, each day straddling the line between exhilaration and dread. I wasn't just a woman fighting back against an obnoxious neighbor anymore, I was caught in a whirlwind of escalating tension, and every moment seemed to push me further into this bizarre rivalry. Kyle was fueled by my little graffiti stunt, and retaliation seemed imminent. The night after the crowd had dispersed, I tossed and turned in bed, haunted by the thought of what Kyle might do next. Visions of his furious face swirled in my mind, an unsettling mix of excitement and fear coursing through me. What if he comes after me? I wondered. What if he vandalizes my car? What if he tries to intimidate me? But then I remembered the thrill I felt when I painted those words on his truck, the rush of reclaiming my space, my dignity. The very act of taking a stand had awakened something inside me that I thought I buried long ago. I wasn't just Joanna, I was a force to be reckoned with. It was a powerful realization, one that made my heart race with possibilities. The next afternoon, as I returned home from work, I spotted Kyle parked in front of his house, his truck gleaming under the afternoon sun. He was pacing back and forth, phone to his ear, probably ranting about me to someone. His demeanor radiated an arrogance I had grown to despise. But instead of fear, I felt something shift within me, a sense of defiance that I couldn't ignore. That's when I saw it, a glimmer of opportunity in the chaos. Kyle had left his garage door wide open, revealing an enticing array of tools and shiny accessories for his beloved truck. A thought flickered through my mind, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The turning point had arrived. In a heartbeat, I felt the thrill of revenge coursing through me again, but this time, it was different. Instead of the rash decision to vandalize, I envisioned an act that would strike where it hurt most, his pride. I could imagine the look on his face if I managed to make a fool of him at his own game. It wasn't about destruction, it was about humiliation. I quickly formulated a plan as I stood there, my heart racing with excitement. I approached him under the guise of civility, forcing a smile and waving. "Hey, Kyle. Nice truck you got there." He shot me a glare that could curdle milk but was too preoccupied to engage me. I couldn't help but feel a rush of power in knowing that I was under his skin. I was thinking about throwing a little parking competition, I began, carefully watching his reaction. To see who can park the best in our little neighborhood. Winner gets bragging rights, and maybe a trophy. The moment I suggested it, I felt a surge of energy, a gleeful spark igniting my plan. Kyle's brow furrowed, and for a second, I thought he might scoff at the idea. But then I saw it, a flicker of intrigue beneath his irritation. "What's this? You think you can outpark me?" He challenged, crossing his arms over his chest, his ego visibly puffed up. "Why not? I may drive a smaller car, but I'll show you how it's done," I replied, my voice steady and confident. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as if sizing me up for a battle. "You're on, Joanna. Just remember, you asked for it." As he accepted the challenge, I felt the adrenaline rush through my veins like a drug. The gears in my mind began to churn as I crafted a plan that would leave him utterly baffled. I wanted to turn his arrogance against him, to orchestrate a spectacle that would draw the entire neighborhood's attention and make him question his own pride. It was all too perfect. I could already envision the day of the competition, a crowd of curious neighbors gathering around as Kyle, filled with confidence, would underestimate my determination. It was clear to me now, the stakes had never been higher, and I was prepared to flip the script, to take my revenge in a way that was as poetic as it was satisfying. The thrill of it all left me breathless. I could see my victory, even before the competition began. By turning the gathering of spectators into an audience for my retribution, I was no longer just Joanna, the nice neighbor. I had transformed into a challenger, ready to unveil the foolishness of my neighbor's ego while simultaneously reclaiming my standing in the community. As the sun began to set that evening, casting a warm golden glow across the neighborhood, I stood outside, heart racing as I lit the spark of my plan. This wasn't just an act of revenge, it was my way of taking back control, transforming the narrative, and finally showing Kyle that he had underestimated me all along. I didn't need to resort to petty vandalism or childish antics. Instead, I would use his own arrogance against him. The turning point had arrived, and I was ready to show Kyle, and everyone else, what it truly meant to take a stand. This was just the first act in a much larger drama, and I was ready to steal the show. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over my front yard, I felt a surge of confidence wash over me. I had a plan, and it was time to execute it with precision and flair. The upcoming parking competition would be the stage for my revenge, where I would artfully weave a narrative that turned Kyle's arrogance into a spectacle of humiliation. I knew I couldn't pull this off alone. To really make an impact, I needed the support of my fellow neighbors. After all, it was their laughter and camaraderie that would amplify the thrill of my victory. I began by casually mentioning the idea to a few close friends and sympathetic neighbors during our morning walks and coffee runs. I painted a picture of a friendly competition, filled with laughing children, cheering adults, and a homemade trophy that I would craft myself. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive. "Oh, I'd love to see Kyle's face when he loses," one neighbor exclaimed, while another chimed in, "Count me in. I'll bring snacks for the crowd." Before I knew it, there was a buzz around the neighborhood about the impending showdown, and my heart raced with excitement. I decided to officially announce the parking competition on our community Facebook page, cleverly branding it the Suburban Showdown, Park Wars Edition. I outlined the details, promising fun, food, and, of course, a trophy for the winner. I cheekily included a photo of my car, a small, unassuming sedan, next to the monstrous silhouette of Kyle's truck, playfully captioned, "Let's see if size really matters." The post went viral within our little neighborhood, and soon it filled with comments from amused neighbors eager to witness the event. I could visualize the anticipation building, the laughter echoing, and Kyle would be none the wiser as he prepared for his grand display of arrogance. The day of the competition arrived, and I was up before dawn, painting a makeshift trophy in my living room, a gold-painted coffee mug mounted on a piece of wood with the words "Parking Champion" written in my best cursive. It was ridiculous, but it captured my spirit perfectly. As I finished up, I could hardly contain my glee at the thought of Kyle's reaction when he saw it. Next, I set the stage in front of our houses. I arranged colorful lawn chairs, laid out a picnic blanket for snacks, and prepared a cooler filled with drinks. I even set up a scoreboard that I made using cardboard, ready to track the parking attempts. This was going to be a neighborhood event, and I aimed to make it as entertaining as possible. As the hour approached, I donned a bright, ridiculous outfit, a Hawaiian shirt and sunglasses, hoping to channel my inner cheerleader. I wanted to play up the fun atmosphere, and my neighbor, Lucy, even brought a portable speaker to play upbeat music to enhance the festive vibes. When Kyle finally strolled outside with a swagger, I caught a glimpse of the smug smile on his face, clearly brimming with confidence. He had no idea what he was stepping into. As he made his way to his truck, I called out, "Hey, Kyle. Ready to show everyone how to park like a pro?" His expression shifted from surprise to annoyance, but he couldn't dismiss the excitement bubbling around him. With neighbors gathering and kids running to grab their seats, Kyle's bravado was met with an audience that was all too eager to see how this would unfold. The rules were simple. Each participant would have one shot to park their vehicle in the spot I had cleverly selected, right next to my own car. The audience would judge based on creativity, precision, and style. I could hardly suppress my laughter as I imagined the absurdity of it all. I went first, expertly maneuvering my compact car into the parking spot with a flourish. I slipped out, bowing dramatically to the cheers of my friends. Not bad for a small car, right? I winked, basking in the applause. Now it was Kyle's turn. He approached his truck, a triumphant smirk on his face as he revved his engine for effect. "Watch and learn, everyone," he bellowed, his confidence palpable as he swung his truck into motion. As he attempted to park, though, things quickly took a turn. Instead of the precision he expected, he miscalculated the distance and ended up encroaching on my side of the driveway, wheels on the line, inching dangerously close to my precious little car. The chorus of gasps from the audience was music to my ears. As he climbed out of his truck, adrenaline coursing through him, I made my move. "Looks like you're straddling the line there, Kyle. Not quite what I expected from the parking pro, huh?" I laughed, the teasing remark earning me a round of applause from the crowd. His face flushed, the smugness replaced with confusion and embarrassment. "This isn't done yet," he retorted, trying to brush it off, but the crowd was already buzzing with laughter. I could see his confidence waning. It was glorious. But I wasn't done. I had one last card to play. I had prepared a surprise for the end of the competition, a mystery judge who would ultimately decide the winner. As the competition wrapped up, I announced, "And now for the final decision, I present to you a surprise guest judge." I had enlisted the help of Mr. Thompson, the grumpy old man who lived at the end of the block. Known for his sharp tongue and disdain for arrogance, he was the perfect choice. As he shuffled over, cane in hand, he surveyed the spectacle with a raised eyebrow. After a few rounds of judging, and with Kyle's truck still awkwardly parked on my territory, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Well, folks, it's clear who the better driver is. The one who knows how to park without taking up 2 spaces. I give my vote to Joanna." The crowd exploded in cheers, laughter, and applause, and I felt a rush of triumph surge through me. Kyle stood there, fists clenched, incredulous as the crowd erupted around me, lifting me on their shoulders in celebration. As Kyle stalked back to his truck, furious and humiliated, I relished the sweet taste of victory. He had been stripped of his arrogance, exposed for the inconsiderate neighbor he was, and I had reclaimed my dignity in the process. From that day forward, the dynamic in our neighborhood shifted. I wasn't just the nice neighbor anymore, I was a formidable presence. Kyle, on the other hand, became the cautionary tale, the neighbor who let his ego get the best of him. In the end, it wasn't just about revenge, it was about standing up for myself, reclaiming my space, and reminding everyone around me that sometimes, As the echoes of cheers still vibrated in the air, I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was no longer just Joanna, I was a phoenix rising from the ashes of my previous frustrations, and the climax of my revenge was finally unfolding before my eyes. The moment Kyle realized he had lost, not just the competition, but the respect of our neighbors, was etched into my memory. His face contorted into an expression of rage and disbelief, a mix of embarrassment and indignation that felt like sweet justice. "You think this is funny, Joanna?" He spat, the words dripping with venom as he stormed back to his truck. But I wasn't going to let him retreat in anger. I needed to confront him, to let him know that I stood unwavering in my victory. I collected my thoughts, took a deep breath, and approached his truck, the very embodiment of confidence. The crowd, sensing the tension, hushed, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. "Listen, Kyle," I said, my voice steady and assertive, "I'm glad we could finally settle this. Maybe now you'll think twice before you park next to my car without regard for my space. This isn't just about parking, it's about respect." His anger sparked as he glared at me, yet a part of him seemed to recognize the truth in my words. "Respect? Are you kidding me?" He scoffed, crossing his arms. "You've just made a fool out of me in front of everyone." I forced a smile, relishing the poetic nature of his predicament. "No, you did that all on your own, Kyle. Maybe if you spent less time flaunting your truck and more time respecting your neighbors, this wouldn't have happened." In that moment, I could see a shift in the crowd's energy. They were no longer mere spectators to an amusing contest, they were witnesses to a transformative moment. I could almost hear their silent cheers, a collective acknowledgement that I had stood my ground and come out on top. Kyle's jaw tightened, and for a brief second, I thought he might lash out physically. But instead, he sighed, the fight visibly leaving him. "Whatever, Joanna. You won this round. Just don't think I'll give up that easily." He climbed into his truck, slamming the door behind him, and the sound reverberated through the neighborhood as he cranked the engine. But I was ready for him. I had anticipated his exit, and just as he backed out, I raised my handmade trophy high above my head. "Don't forget, Kyle. I'll be waiting for a rematch. And next time, maybe try parking a little less like a jerk." The crowd burst into laughter and applause, a triumphant roar that shook the very air around us. Kyle's face flushed with fury, but I could see he was outnumbered. He accelerated down the street, tires screeching against the asphalt, leaving behind a flurry of dust and a community that had finally taken a stand against his arrogance. As the dust settled, I felt an overwhelming wave of emotion wash over me: elation, relief, triumph. My heart swelled with pride as my neighbors began to gather around, clapping me on the back and congratulating me. "You really showed him, Joanna," a woman exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with admiration. The crowd rallied around me, celebrating not just my victory, but the empowerment I had ignited within them. In that moment, I felt like a champion, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever felt trampled by a bully. This victory resonated deeper than any petty revenge. It was a clarion call for respect, boundaries, and community. I lifted the trophy high once more, basking in the glow of approval and laughter. "Next time, we'll have even more challenges," I declared, the crowd cheering in response. "Who wants to join me for an obstacle course? We'll show Kyle that size doesn't matter when it comes to fun." As the cheers rang out, I felt a sense of kinship with my neighbors. We were all in this together, united by the common thread of standing up for what was right. I knew this day would be remembered as a turning point, for not just me, but for everyone who had grown tired of Kyle's antics. In that climactic moment, I learned that true courage comes not from seeking revenge but from finding strength in standing up for yourself and your community. The thrill of triumph filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile, knowing that I had reclaimed my place in this neighborhood not just as a neighbor, but as a force of change. And as the sun set behind us, casting golden rays over our little gathering, I realized that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where kindness and respect reigned supreme, and where I would continue to fight for what mattered, one day at a time. The days that followed the suburban showdown, Park Wars edition, were nothing short of surreal. I felt like I was walking on air, buoyed by the euphoria of the victory. But as with any battle, the aftermath wasn't without its consequences. and I was about to learn that the thrill of triumph can be accompanied by its own set of complexities. After that unforgettable day, Kyle seemed to retreat into his shell, sulking beneath the veneer of his truck like a wounded animal. The once boisterous engine roars and obnoxious bass beats that echoed through our neighborhood faded. It was almost eerie, a void left in his absence. My initial sense of victory began to shift into something more contemplative. Had I pushed him too far? Had I crossed a line that might have repercussions beyond just parking disputes? As the weeks went by, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors who were now rallying around me, not just because I had stood up to Kyle, but because I had ignited a spirit of camaraderie in our neighborhood that had long been dormant. Potluck dinners sprung up, and the sense of community seemed to flourish like never before. For every handshake and supportive message I received, however, there was a lingering shadow of doubt that crept in. One evening, as I sat on my front porch sipping iced tea and enjoying the summer breeze, I caught a glimpse of Kyle. He was sitting in his garage, staring at his truck with that same defeated expression that had marred his face after the competition. I felt an impulse to confront him, to approach him and offer peace. But would that undermine my small victory? Would it show weakness? I hesitated, the conflict raging in my mind. A few days later, our community organized a cleanup effort at the local park, and I couldn't resist getting involved. As I gathered with neighbors to pick up trash and paint benches, I noticed Kyle's father, Mr. Davis, attending the event. He was a kind man, always waving hello and sharing stories about his grandchildren. I approached him, and as we chatted, I learned that Kyle had been struggling with some personal issues, including a recent breakup and work stress. It shed a new light on his erratic behavior. I realized he wasn't just a bully but perhaps a man who was battling his own demons. Feeling a flicker of compassion, I decided to take action, something that surprised even me. The following week, I baked a batch of cookies, an olive branch if you will, and walked over to Kyle's house. I hesitated at his front door, nervously fiddling with the plate of cookies as I contemplated the potential outcome. When Kyle opened the door, his expression was one of shock, not rage. I could see the weariness etched on his face, the remnants of the bravado that had once defined him now stripped bare. "What do you want, Joanna?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how things escalated," I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I think we both got a bit carried away. I know we can have our differences, but I'd rather not stay in an endless battle with you." He blinked at me, seemingly caught off guard. "Are you serious?" he retorted, skepticism hanging in the air. "You're not mad about the cookies being carbs?" I chuckled, the tension slowly dissipating. "No, I'm just hoping we can start fresh. Maybe work together on keeping our neighborhood great instead of fighting over parking spaces." For the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, and it felt like a breakthrough. He sighed, the walls around him crumbling just a bit. "I guess I've been an ass. I didn't realize how far things had gone. I'm just trying to figure some things out in my life, and I took it out on you." At that moment, I felt a rush of empathy for him. We were both flawed humans stumbling through life in search of respect and belonging. The lines of rivalry blurred, and instead of reveling in my triumph, I felt a sense of shared humanity. Kyle took the plate of cookies with a hesitant smile, and as I turned to leave, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Maybe in seeking revenge and reclaiming my space, I had also unwittingly opened a door to understanding. In the weeks that followed, the dynamic between us began to shift. Kyle joined our community cleanup efforts, and as I worked alongside him, we found ourselves engaged in light banter rather than petty arguments. It became clear that beneath the bravado, he was just a guy trying to navigate a challenging chapter in his life, one that bore resemblance to my own struggles. Eventually, through mutual respect and camaraderie, the rift began to close, and our neighborhood began healing from the wounds of rivalry. Our once silent conversations slowly morphed into sincere exchanges about work and life, and, surprisingly, I found myself enjoying his company. It was a strange turn of events, and by the time summer rolled into fall, a semblance of friendship emerged from the ashes of animosity. I even found the courage to invite him to our next neighborhood potluck, and to my surprise, He showed up with a homemade dish, an attempt to contribute that spoke volumes of his own growth. As I look back at the tumultuous journey from that initial parking dispute to the camaraderie we now shared, I realized that sometimes revenge isn't the answer. The victory I had sought in standing up against Kyle had morphed into something greater, a deeper understanding of not just my own motivations, but of another person's struggles. In the end, the lesson was profound. Revenge may provide a fleeting thrill, but empathy and respect have the power to heal and transform relationships. Life is too short to remain tethered to grudges. The real victory lies in forging connections where animosity once reigned. And so, as I sat with my neighbors laughing and sharing stories while the leaves began to turn golden, I couldn't help but smile. I had learned that in seeking to reclaim my place, I had inadvertently built a community, a place where kindness, respect, and understanding could flourish, even amidst the most unexpected of rivalries. Sometimes, it's not the loudest voices that echo the longest, it's the quiet gestures of understanding that truly resonate. In the drama of life, the greatest plot twists often come not from vengeance, but from the courage to extend a hand instead of a fist. And that, I knew, would forever shape the narrative of our little suburban neighborhood. Who would have thought? I'm used to myself, laughter echoing in the background. All it took was a parking feud to find our way back to each other.